Does suffering have an opposite?
Suffering is suffering. Because suffering is suffering, suffering is not suffering. And no suffering is no suffering. No suffering is not suffering. No suffering is then no suffering. It's like no suffering. Suffering then is a concept. For some people it's a condition, a conceptual condition. A conceptual condition which is identified with and suffered as a result.
What is the relationship between pleasure and suffering?
Pleasure is suffering. Eating sweets is suffering. All the things you think are good and beautiful and pleasurable, they're sufferings. Suffering is pleasure. Non-suffering is pleasure. And pleasure is non-suffering.
Is no suffering a neutral state?
No suffering is a neutral state. It is an active state. It's real. We are not always suffering. We may be suffering changes, but we suffer changes of state. And we suffer suffering. You have to go beyond suffering. You have to cognize suffering as something you may be doing to yourself or you've allowed to accumulate in yourself. So suffering is self-created and self-release. We can release ourselves from certain suffering. Not all pain can be easily released. It has to be understood. Suffering. It's a self-process. Not letting go. Clinging. Holding. Suffering. Not free breathing. It's obstruction. Holding. Holding oneself back and down is suffering. Maybe letting oneself up and out is also suffering. Maybe preoccupation with anything is suffering. Just sit and breathe. That's suffering. So the release of suffering, depending on your state. Release yourself from suffering. That's good. No suffering. No other. No suffering. No self. No suffering. Nevertheless, you have things to do. There are things that come up, it's all part of your karmic pattern, what you are capable of handling, inclined to handle, and naturally given to handle, to do, without self, without the other, and without doing, it gets done. So it depends then as to how well you recognize the function of selfless, clear functioning.
Does suffering arise from, let's say, our karmic past, or is it something we create in the moment, in the now?
Well, if you don't know how to dispose of your suffering or release yourself from suffering, then it's your condition. People who are living lives are living in suffering, without themselves analyzing it. Suffering. Once you see what the suffering is, and say, oh, I'm drinking this, I'm eating this, I'm doing this, I'm talking this, it's all part of my suffering. You let go of it. It doesn't have to be suffered. Speaking can be selfless. Breathing is already selfless. Being is already selfless. Playing music is already selfless, actually. So you create a self fishiness about it. So make it selfish.
Does the self want to be selfless?
It could want, see? The self as a program, it's limitation, self-identification, that's it. It could be that the self wants selflessness, but that's not selflessness. Selflessness is already free of that. No. Selflessness is a term for what is, let's say, and it's already, being is. It already is being, so to speak. Very subtle. It has nothing to do with games people play. Or games that control and dominate people, preoccupy people, or confuse people. There's no confusion where selflessness is, in a sense. No confusion, nothing. Right.
So would you say that when we suffer conditions, we're suffering our reaction to conditions?
Just suffering conditions. You're just suffering suffering. It's not even about the conditions. Suffering suffering. Okay.
Is there a
So
value?
suffering is more direct than suffering your causes of suffering. Right? The things that are outside of you, causing you in your mind suffering, like politics, family, breakdowns and so on and so forth.
So does that suffering have a value, let's say as a catalyst for change?
For some, it is exactly what's necessary for people to awaken. They awaken to their suffering and their life changes.
Is a life spent in suffering, let's say, a karmic payment towards having a life free of suffering?
Could be. Not that there's any sense to it. The point is it's not a promise. Nothing you experience is a promise of anything else, actually. Except that you see it as evidence that you're here to suffer. You're here to die, accordingly, lawfully, when the time comes, under the conditions already agreed upon, as it is.
Is a life spent in suffering a wasted life?
Could be, for some. Maybe that is even the judgment of certain people. When they start to get closer to their point, and they wasted their lives, they can think that, they can feel that, but that doesn't change anything. You have to say, yeah, I'm dying now, it's okay, this is good. Nothing else you can do about it. So it's happening now, the body's dying and I'm being released to the next dimension. See? Or field, next field of operation. From light back to light.
Is transcension of suffering an all or nothing?
Letting go. Already, not suffering. Not suffering.
So it's suffering or no suffering?
Like there's no consciousness. There's consciousness and there's unconsciousness or no consciousness. They're simultaneous. You can switch from consciousness to unconsciousness. No consciousness. No sort of consciousness. It's radical, like just here, just here. Yeah, only or simply just here. It's too much for some people to bear. They can't just be here, too much to do. Being here is plenty to do. Too much for some people to do. they can't let go enough to actually be here. Takes training in some cases. Others can just be here and enjoy that.
Does that happen in small increments? Can we let go for a moment here, a moment there?
You can train yourself to let go. You can be trained. You can be trained to enter enlightenment. Whatever that is. Come with training. Just as you can enter it yourself. Because it's the real. Can you handle the real right now? The really real? The only real? The very real? The real real? And embrace it, be completely relaxed into the real real, open beyond neuroses. It's practice. Who's to say after that, what's next? So our spiritual potential, not our psychologic, say, tendency, spiritual potential. It's true.